Om Asato Ma Sadagamaya Tamaso Maham Jyotirgamaya Mrityormam Amritam Gamaya Avir Ahavir Maedhi Rudra Yate Dakshinam Mukham Te Namaham Pahinityam. Om, lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness unto light. Lead us from death to immortality. Reach us through and through ourselves, and evermore protect us from ignorance by thy sweet, compassionate face. So my subject this morning is Vedanta in 5 words. A, B, C, D, E, like 5 blocks in a grade school classroom. The red, the white, the black, the yellow, the green. These are the core concepts of the Vedanta philosophy. And it will be helpful for us to meditate on each one. The first concept is Brahman. Brahman is the absolute truth. Brahman is the ultimate non-dual reality. Brahman, the ultimate truth, cannot be described. It's ineffable. This is because language is logical and it's dualistic. And anything that it describes, it limits. So the essential definition of Brahman in the Upanishads is neti, neti, that is whatever you can think of. It's not this, it's not this. But inquiring minds want to know. And therefore, saints and sages describe Brahman using some excluder predicates. That means words which are helpful to us to understand the concept, but which can't be pushed too far, can't be taken literally. Let's look at some of those words that describe the ultimate reality. Brahman is being. That's being with a capital B. We could say that it's the ground, it's the universal, well, being is the universal predicate of all things. And if we try to think of the highest generalization of anything that we can conceive of, then that would be being. Brahman is the substance of all things. And that is, just as we open our eyes and we see many different sense objects, it's just Brahman appearing to us as sense qualities. When we think and feel in the interior mind, Brahman, which we call the mind, that is the matrix of those thoughts and feelings, just Brahman, but we call it the mind. And when a saint or sage has a vision of God or goddess, is Brahman, but we call it the spirit. And so we have matter, we have mind, and we have spirit. All 3 really names for the same thing, just as you have ice, you have water, and you have steam. all of them can be described, the essential definition would be H2O. Brahman also is the substratum of all things. That is, that this world appears just as a rope in the twilight hours, dimly lit time of the day. The rope may appear as a snake. Similarly, this world appears to us. It has a real substratum that is Brahman. Brahman also can be described by the word consciousness. Brahman is pure, self-luminous consciousness. Each one of us has within us, we have like a point of light, lighting our interior mind and illuminating the world of our perception. But Brahman is consciousness with a capital C. That is, it is infinite, impersonal consciousness. Brahman is not a god or a goddess. Brahman is not the consciousness that we associate with Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, Kali, Durga. Brahman, rather, is the pure consciousness that is the self of all of these beings. So Brahman is not a being, it's being itself. The Sanskrit word is in the neuter singular. And we kind of think maybe that's a little strange to refer to the ultimate reality in the neuter gender, which we associate with objects and things like rocks. But philosophers in ancient times knew that the impersonal transcended all genders. Sanskrit is a gendered language, so that's everything. And therefore the neuter is the higher word to refer to the ultimate reality. We could say that Brahman is the one, only, without a second, because it is infinite. It is the infinite. There can only be one infinite. You can't have two infinites. There can only be one infinite. Therefore, it's called the one, only, without a second. And by one here, we don't mean that it's like one God up in heaven who's created the whole world. And we don't mean that it's like one whole that's comprised of many different parts. Rather, by that phrase, we mean the ultimate non-dual reality, the absolute. There is one absolute reality. There is one highest truth. It's that which enables us to, without that, without the ultimate reality, without the ultimate truth, we couldn't think, we couldn't speak, we couldn't communicate, we couldn't understand anything. In fact, we wouldn't, we couldn't be aware of anything at all. That's because, well, if everything is relative, then nothing really has an identity. And therefore, we couldn't understand each other as we refer to one thing having an individual nature and not. Therefore, we cannot escape the idea of the absolute, the ultimate truth, the ground of being called Brahman. That's the first core concept of Vedanta. Let's look at the second. Second word here is Ishvara. Ishvara is the God of Vedanta. Ishvara is not his name. Ishvara just means the ruler of the universe. That's Ishvara. He's nameless and he's formless. In fact, Ishvara is the impersonal, personal God of Vedanta. And if it sounds like that's kind of like a contradiction, you can remember Sri Ramakrishna's parable about the washerman who used also to dye clothes. And he would set up his big tub of dye, and customers would line up with their white cotton cloths. And one customer would come up to the washerman, say, "What color would you like?" "Well, I red." He dipped the cloth into the vat, it's red, pulls it out, beautiful red color. "Thank you very much." Hang it up there on the line to dry. Next customer comes up. "What color would you like your cloth?" "I want it blue." "Oh, no problem," said the washerman. Dipped it in the pot of dye, pulled it out, beautiful color. Oh, customer was so happy, put it up on the line to dry. So like this, one by one, everyone was getting different colors. Well, one man, as he was moving forward in line, he thought, "That's very curious. I wonder what that is. How is that possible?" And it became his turn, and the washerman asked him what color. The man said, "I want my cloth dyed the color of the dye in your vat." Well, the washerman was a little confused. He says, "Oh, I'm sorry, sir, I can't do that. The dye only assumes the colors of what the customer wants." So like the dyeing of different colors, the impersonal, personal, Brahman, that is Ishvara, God, is an impersonal, personal God, just like ourselves. God has a body, just as we have a body. So God also has a body, a universal cosmic body. If you put all of the individual entities together, well, you get a cosmic being. The macrocosm and the microcosm. So just as man, just as you have a mind, so also there is a cosmic mind. Your mind is a part of a larger whole. That's the mind of God. Just as you have a soul, so there is a Paramatman, that is, there is a universal soul. This is Ishvara, the impersonal, personal God of Vedanta. Ishvara is the cause of this universe. It is that from which, I'm just quoting to you kind of roughly, some Sanskrit verses that describe Brahman. That from which everything arises, that by which everything is maintained, and that into which everything returns in the end. That is, what did I say, Brahman? Ishvara. We're on second word. We're on the second concept. That's Ishvara. Ishvara is the creator, the preserver, and the destroyer of this world. He appears as Brahma. He appears as Vishnu. He appears as Shiva, Kali. Who is it that created this world? Well, maybe we could say, if we were to be precise, it wouldn't really be Ishvara, because he delegates these powers. And so that the actual creator of our universe, his name is Brahma. And Brahma was once a guy, just like you and I, but he did great austerities, and he became the greatest of the spiritual aspirants in his realization. And when he died, he was given this post, that is to preside over creation. But he's not the actual creator. Because at one time, he, after he'd seen the whole creation, which he had himself projected and taken charge of, he saw there were many problems and difficulties. And so he said, I've got to go and speak to the supervisor about this. And so he went up to a higher plane, and he went to the receptionist to get an appointment with Ishvara. And the secretary, she says, well, take a number. And Brahma, well, I'm the creator of the world. What do you mean? I don't take it. What do I have to take a number for? Well, take a number and go to that room, which he did. He opened the door, and what did he see? Hundreds and thousands of other Brahmas, like himself. They were all creators of their own universes. So Ishvara, we can say, is the creator of what we would call the multiverse, the creator of all things. God creates through a power. He has a power which is called Maya. Maya is the power of Ishvara. And just as a magician has a power and can create all kinds of appearances. Maybe you've heard about the Indian rope trick. In the Indian rope trick, well, in ancient times, an Indian magician would come into a small village with his apprentice, just a young boy, and he'd gather together all the villagers, and they'd go out. There would be a big open field. And the magician would put the basket out in the middle of the field, and everyone was standing around watching what's going to happen. And the magician repeated some mantras, and up out of the basket, there uncoiled a rope. And the rope went up and up and up and up into the clouds. And then he said, well, boy, to his apprentice, climb up that rope. See if you get up, maybe you'll find some treasure up there in those, above the clouds. And so the boy climbed up the rope. Little by little, he went up and he disappeared in the clouds. And they waited for a few moments, and then the magician said, hello, boy, what have you found? No answer. He called again, no answer. And then the magician thought, oh yes, you have found some treasured item. And he was vexed with that boy. And so he climbed himself. He climbed up the rope. He climbed and climbed up that rope till he disappeared. And then all the villagers, they heard a quarrel and they heard a scuffle. And what did they see? Well, the magician, he climbs up, he has his scimitar, that means his sword in his belt. And what do they see? After they hear these cries, an arm falls down out of the clouds. It's the boy's arm. And then a leg falls down. And they hear more cries. The boy's head falls down on the ground. Everyone is shocked. And then they see the magician slowly coming down the rope. He comes down the rope, he looks around, the rope goes back into the basket, and the magician picks up one of those body parts one by one, the leg and the arm and the head, puts it in the basket, covers the basket, says a few words, and lo and behold, out of the basket there jumps the boy, hale and hearty, laughing and smiling. And all the villagers are stunned and amazed. So similarly it is with this world. Ishvara, with none of the power of Maya, creates this world. Shankaracharya tells us, like a magician, does the Indian rope trick. And that's why in Vedanta, that this relative world has an ontology, that is a philosophy of being, which is radically different from the absolute. God is not Brahman. These are two different concepts. That this world in which we live, that is God's creation, is the relative world. It's a dualist, the world of dualism. And as our dreams or illusions or a castle in the air, so is this world viewed by the wise in the Vedanta. The ultimate nature of this relative world, created through Mahamaya by God, the impersonal, personal God. Let's look here at the third concept. And that is Atman. The Atman is just your true self. The Atman is your original self. If you look within, we find you have an essence. You have a nature. You have a soul. And not only do you have a soul, but according to the Indian philosophy, there is a soul of your soul. The soul of the soul is called the self. And what is yourself? Well, you know, myself. I refer to myself as I am. That is yourself, is just your consciousness. It's not that you have consciousness or that you have a soul, but that you are a soul. You are consciousness. Just as the sun, that is the I consciousness within us, it is a reflected consciousness, true, but still, just as the sun is reflected in a drop of water, on the dewdrop on the morning grass, we can see an exact image of the sun. That image has all the qualities of the sun. And so similarly it is with ourself. We could call this self within us, we could call it the spirit. The spirit is the soul of our soul. It is our consciousness. It's the self of ourself. It's the I of the I. And this self, this consciousness, this spirit is by definition, it is infinite. It has no boundaries. It's because, why? It's immaterial. Spirit is unbounded and it's infinite. And when we hear this, we can think, oh, well, that's myself. It sounds like it sounds very far-fetched. It sounds like how's that impossible? That I'm not infinite. I feel myself to be very finite and limited. And it's true that it appears to us that we have two selves. That is, we have two Atmans. And the analogy given in the Upanishads is that of if you were to walk through the forest, and there you see many big, tall trees, and one tree in particular, you notice that on that self-same tree, there are two birds perched on the self-same tree. One is on the lower branch, and the other is on the higher branch. And if we look closely, we can see that the bird on the lower branch is kind of hopping around and is eating the sweet and the bitter fruits. And the bird on the higher branch is just sitting there quietly, calmly, looking on without eating. And as the lower bird gets a particularly bitter fruit, he becomes dissatisfied and he looks up, and there he sees the higher bird up on the top of the tree, and he thinks, yes, that's where I would like to be. And so he hops up one branch, but then he gets distracted. He starts eating the sweet and the bitter fruits again. Then he gets another bitter fruit. Again, he looks up. He sees that higher bird sitting calmly and quietly. He hops up one or two branches to get closer. And so like this, time passes. And pretty soon we see as he hops up 2 branches, hops up to the top. He gets up to the top. And finally, with one last jump, he merges into the higher bird. And we as observers, we realize that really there weren't 2 birds there. There were really only one bird all the time. And you know how in a forest, when the wind is maybe blowing through the trees, the sun is shining, that there may be reflections in the limbs and the branches of the trees, and the reflections and appearances. And so it's easy for us to see an illusory bird there. But really there's only one bird. Oh, that's the higher bird. Now, what is the lower bird? Well, the lower bird, of course, symbolizes our everyday walking around ego consciousness. Driven by our karma, we eat the sweet and bitter fruits of our actions. The higher bird, however, represents our realized self. That is our enlightened self. It realizes, the higher bird is ourself as we were in the beginning. That is created in the image of God. And that higher self is the witness of the body and the mind and the soul. And yes, it has I consciousness, but it's the ego, it has, as it were, ego. Sri Ramakrishna says there's the unripe ego and the ripe ego. This is the ego of the jnani, the ego of the devotee, who has realized their higher nature. Sitting quietly in solitude, such a person is content and finds happiness within. In transactions with the world, such a person is non-attached and is the witness in interpersonal relationships. That enlightened being feels empathy and kindness and compassion and charity and love. These are all natural good qualities that are part of our own image, original image, created in the image of God. Now, sometimes people ask, what is the difference between the Atman, which we have said, the Atman is spirit, it's infinite. What's the difference between the Atman and Brahman, the absolute? And for now, we could give an answer to that question. And we could say that the Atman is the God within us when we close our eyes and we look within. And Brahman is the God in everything when we open our eyes and we see the substance of all things. And so for right now, let's just leave that definition here, that the Atman is the principle of subjectivity, Brahman is the principle of objectivity. We're going to come back to this in a minute. You know, today, in our world today, we find that this is a world that's characterized by skepticism and by nihilism. And this is why Vedanta teaching is so fundamental. is so transformative, because it's true that even in a postmodern world, that we can question, we can doubt, we can deny reality and morality and all kinds of any ideas and values that we have. They can all be doubted. But there's one thing that we can never doubt, and that is our own self-consciousness, our own true self. How could you doubt it? Well, who would the doubter be? Well, it would just be yourself. So we're left with the Atman. That's the third idea. Let's look here at the fourth idea. Fundamental core concept of Vedanta, and that is the word yoga. Now, yoga just means spiritual practice. Many different kinds of spiritual practice. But a spiritual practice, a yoga, is a spiritual practice that is done with the purpose of realizing God or of having a personal experience of the divine. Just because you sit quietly and close your eyes and meditate in order to achieve some calmer state, that's not yoga. That's using a technique of yoga, but it doesn't become a yoga unless your purpose is to realize some spiritual ideal. Now, there are many different kinds of yogas, which you're probably very well acquainted. But just to put them all in a story, comes to us from the Chandogya Upanishad. Indra and Virochana were two kings in ancient times, and they heard the proclamation of the Lord Prajapati, that is Ishvara. He proclaimed, the Atman is the existence absolute, it's absolute knowledge, it's absolute infinite bliss. He who achieves and realizes the Atman becomes the Lord and the knower, ruler of all beings. And Indra and Virochana, both those kings, they heard that proclamation, and they approached Prajapati as their guru, said, please teach us about this. They both wanted that knowledge. And Prajapati said, yes, of course. Live with me for 32 years. Which they said, okay, that was the tradition. And so they lived in the ashrama, serving the devotees and doing their prayers and serving the guru and singing the name and the glories 32 years. And then Prajapati gave them the instruction, go there to that pond, look in that pond, the glassy waters, and there you'll see, you'll understand what is the Atman, what is your true self. And so they both went there and looked in the pond. And what did they see? Well, they just saw their bodies. And they were kings, they were there decked out in jewels and crown. And Virochana, seeing that, thought, wow, that's the Atman. He's a royal, kingly being. The Atman is the body. Now I understand. He was so happy. And finally he had understood this doctrine. He returned to his kingdom, and he became the lord of the demons. But Indra, looking in, he also saw the same reflection. He thought, okay, yeah, now I understand. And he left. He was returning home, but he began to think, and he began to discriminate. And he thought, it can't be the body. That can't be right. And so he returned to Prajapati, and he said, Prajapati, well, yeah, you're right. Live with me for another 32 years. And so like this, it went on. He told him about the nature then of the dream self. And then he had to go back and he had another 32 years. Well, the Atman, oh yeah, that's the self which you see in deep sleep. Now Indra, still he was dissatisfied, returned again to his teacher. He said, give me the real teaching of the Atman. And Prajapati said, yes, live another 5 years. And after that, after all that doing of that yoga practices in the ashrama for all those, 96 plus 5 years, all different kinds of yoga practice, spiritual practices, then he qualified to be the. So like this, there are many different kinds of yoga, which you know. And all of those used to be thought in ancient times that you had to choose one particular practice. Say you had bhakti yoga, the path of divine love. You choose that, good. You don't do jnana yoga, karma yoga. Get your mind distracted. That was the old teaching. Now in the new dispensation, however, our ideal is the idea of the harmony of the 4 yogas. That is, all forms of spiritual practice can be kind of summarized in those 4 yogas, which if you take up any book that's published by the Ramakrishna order, there you will see that there is a seal or an emblem on the book. And it's an allegory. It pictures a lake. And on the lake, there is floating a red lotus. And around the whole lake, there is a serpent who coils of the whole picture. Up behind the lake, there's the sun, there's the blue sky, and the sun of knowledge is arising. And on the wavy waters of karma float the Paramahamsa, that is the swan, which is your true self. And so the idea is that by the union of all of these different yogas, forms of spiritual practice, then we can realize our true nature. So that's the ideal in this Ramakrishna order. Let's look at the 5th. Is a good old Anglo-Saxon word, which we know and love. But probably when we think of freedom, we think most prominently of the Revolution. And we think about the civil rights movement. And we think about all kinds of physical and economic and political freedom. But that is, moksha means spiritual freedom. That's why we want to incorporate that word to be more precise. That our ideal, that is our ideal. That's the goal of life. That's the purpose of our life, is to achieve spiritual freedom. Spiritual freedom. Freedom from what? Well, from pain and suffering. Freedom from ignorance and from the lack of self-knowledge. Freedom from hate and separation from God and from others. Freedom from mental turmoil and inner conflict. Freedom from limitations, from all limitations. Because all happiness is only in the infinite. It can never be in the finite. That is, any happiness which is relative, which is changing, which is dualistic, will necessarily come and it will pass away. In order to therefore, to achieve spiritual freedom, Vedanta teaches us that we need knowledge. That's what Vedanta means. It means knowledge. But it doesn't mean book knowledge. It doesn't mean scriptural knowledge. It means direct, immediate, superconscious realization of the ultimate truth. Knowledge in Vedanta means knowledge, to knowing, realizing that you are one with everything in the world, that you are one with God, that God is one with the world. Realizing that is having the immediate direct perception that you are a divine immortal soul, that you are an infinite being. And here we can come back to our distinction between Atman and Brahman, because we said Atman is the God within, Brahman is the God in everything. But the Vedantins can't remain content with that, because this is a teaching of non-dualism. That is, there's really only one without a second. There can't be a subject and the object. And you may say, well, how is that possible? It sounds like a paradox. But if you take a piece of white paper and you draw a line across it, what do you have? Atman, Brahman. A, B, self, other, this, that. That is all of dualism. And it's very easy for us to transcend that just by erasing the line. And all you have then is the pure white substratum, the foundation of all being. And that's the goal and purpose of our spiritual life, is to attain unconditional, unbounded, infinite spiritual freedom. So those are the 5 words. And sometimes it's good to go back to basics and just to think about one particular concept, try to sort it out from the others. And so here we have them, A, B, C, D, E, kind of 5 core concepts that together make up the Vedanta world view. Okay, do we have a few minutes here? Yeah. Maybe if someone has a question or a commentary or a pushback or a disagreement. Yes. Yes.
Referring to what you said about the Ramakrishna order and its emblem,
yes.
I would like to point that just right behind is the emblem.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. So
there you go.
Because normally it's covered by the curtain, but this is what Swamiji is talking about, the swan, the serpent, the snake. So just
that was apropos. Yeah.
Thank you.
That's that kind of visual representation of our spiritual ideal. Yeah. Other question? Commentary? Disagreement? Yes.
I feel this is something worth, as I was listening to you, I felt this is something maybe going over again for us. You know, there's so much information. You must have had all the time to think about it. You can present it without even notes. Are these talks recorded somewhere where we can get back to them?
Well, probably. Yeah, there.
Yes.
There's a recording.
Yeah, but okay, but yeah, but there's only 5 words. That was the point. We only gave 5 words, so I thought it wasn't 25 words. No, I know, of course. It's just that we're trying. The point is to try to get an overview of the whole philosophy. Sometimes it's helpful for us to do that. Otherwise, it's very easy to get lost in the woods and lose sight of the forest for the trees. Yeah.